Hi there, and thank you for clicking on this video. This video is going to be sort of a during a mockcast state. Somebody posted a comment. It was a question. How is the game telling new players what elements are good against what faction? A bad thing just means you aren't going to the wiki or digging through the codex as much. I feel like they could have taken the 13 health types down to like 6 or 7, and it would still be complex enough to be engaged and still streamlined to help things easier to pick up. So this is going to be sort of explaining my position on this. I'm going to talk about the armor changes as well, just sort of as I see it, how things are going to change and what the issues are. First and foremost, the example that they gave, talking specifically about the elements that are recommended being under each mission type, I think is a straight up good thing. The problem is they are the elements that they showed. They need to show. This is overall a positive thing, so no critique of that. The issue was that we were talking about during the modcast is that's not how you mod against those enemies. If a new player uses those, they will do damage, like say in the star chart. But the fact is that that's not how you mod against those enemies in order to make the content easier, so you feel strong per se. So, like, say for example, we're in the simulacrum as normally. These are Grenier. They have ferrite armor. It has a plus 75 weakness to corrosive. I should have pulled this up. Grenier weakness. So plus 75 weakness to corrosive, plus 25 to heat, plus 25 to slash. What this chart means is basically is letting you know that the modded section, that weighting on your weapon that is corrosive, if it is against ferrite, will ignore 75% of the armor and then receive a 75% damage boost, more or less. The heat portion, because we are using a Phantasma right now, will receive a 25% bypass, so it's only going to have to deal with 75% of the enemy's armor. We're like corrosive only has to deal with 25% of the armor. Slash, which this weapon isn't slash, it's impact based. But if I had a slash weapon, would then also bypass 25% of the resistance when it's calculating the damage that you see on screen. So according to this chart, if I wanted to go through and do this, let's see, pure slash, that's Zedorklav. And if I wanted to get corrosive onto here, I would throw Fever Strike on. Okay, so I have a monster corrosive weighting, and my IPS is slash, right? So I have this bonus against ferrite, and this bonus against ferrite are what this weapon's taking access to. This is how they want you to mod, more or less, based on that recommendation for raw damage. And you can see the issue here. So about 600, we're at 1.6. 1.2, 3.4, we're getting oranges. Lots of raw damage. 5k. And obviously that's all weapon damage. So we're not worried about dots or anything, or ability buffs or anything like that. The problem is that how you mod against these enemies is you basically use dots. So the weapon's pure slash. We're gonna go with our standard build. Let's see, Grenier. Organ Shatter. Actually, the attack speed's a little slow. Let's do this one. Okay, so base damage, crit chance, status chance, our faction damage, reach, attack speed, crit damage, and we should probably do Organ Shatter here. Just because the attack speed's a little low. Let's get some enemies. So though our raw damage, you can see we're like in the single digits, double digits. Our dot is hitting for thousands, where we needed a full combo to do that. 9k, we got a 90k on a headshot. Just shy of 1 mil there. 46k. So if their recommendation is going to tell the new player to mod corrosive, they will do less damage. Now the issue that you brought up also is taking the 13 health types down to like 6 or 7. The issue is that this is an already solved problem, and instead of putting it in the game, because it's this chart that you see, and everybody's eyes sort of glazes over. But even though there's a bunch of stuff here, it's not that many types that you have to deal with. They just need to put it in the game. Like if they, on that little info panel, which is still an overall positive, I'm saying it's a positive, but it doesn't tell you, it tells you the raw damage increase. Like the number that you see on your screen from when you hit them. It's not recommending, oh, like viral slash against lower level Grenier. But that once you get to star chart, you need to swap to corrosive, because the enemy finally has enough armor. So you would do like a corrosive slash or corrosive heat. If you have a Riven, you can get away with this on primaries, where you run like corrosive mods, like corrosive 60/60s, and then you put like heat on the Riven, or you have a Riven mod that has toxin on it. So you'll do corrosive with the Riven and an electric 60/60, and then you do a 90 mod for heat and hunter munitions. That is a ton of raw damage increase, and that is a dot that bypasses the enemy's defense. Or you ignore the heat dot completely in terms of modding and just utilize it for the raw damage increase that way. We also have tools that are available now where armor just isn't a factor. All of my secondaries are running corrosive. Like the compressor is the best primer in the game for like general use for like lazy builds. So two corrosive shards on the frame. You got this guy here. One shot and it doesn't have armor. Do we really need an armor rebalance with this sort of stuff? This stuff needs to be put in the game. Due diligence needs to be done before you mess with the stats. There is nothing in the game itself that tells you how to do this. And that's sort of the frustration on my end, is that, like the codex, for example, it was a joke. Like I was watching a stream yesterday with somebody that was doing a defection mission, and in the mission section of the codex, defection isn't even in there. It lists all the other types of missions, but defection isn't even listed. What was the other one? The Nidus node isn't in here either. Right? You type in DEF, you have defense and mobile defense. These are the generic mission types. right? So the issue is that the information needs to be put in the game first before you start tweaking with it, and messing with the underlying way that everybody in this game interacts with the game is what the issue most people are having. For late game players, I'm going to be honest, it is going to make the build diversity go way down in terms of what you can get away with, while increasing how tanky the enemy is at level cap. The enemy, it's just going to be tankier enemies in level cap. But the build diversity, if people start taking corrosive off their off their weapons, because you're only getting a 10 times damage reduction, viral might end up being the way to go. But I want to point it out exactly, because I know that doesn't make sense what I just said, where the build diversity is actually going to go down. So let's actually go to the dev stream. It's only a 15-minute portion. I'll stop and I guess I will do like a pseudo live react.
Kids, class is in
Get
session.
your notepads out.
Notepads out. Pablo.
Okay, so this is a long one. Let me start by saying that this hasn't gone through play testing. We're still experimenting.
Word of warning to everybody that watches me on faster speed. I'm going to speed up the dev stream. We'll do 1 1/4 so it doesn't sound like chipmunk mode.
With things, so a lot of what I'm going to talk about might and very likely will change. So yeah, there's a.
And also, first and foremost, the thing that's most frustrating is for players who are newer to the game, yes, it will be easier to pick up. Not because it will be easier to pick up, but because the game isn't going to force you to learn anything until later. Like, I've seen people doing Steel Path that are running, like, blast builds on, like, blast radiation builds on, like, their melees. And they've gotten all the way to Steel Path without even having to figure out what's going on. But they're new players, though. It's one of the things where it's like, there's this overall dynamic, and people want to make it out to be like, oh, those are like, you know, sweaty players, right? That's not the case. The dynamic is that the older players were getting stopped at each point. Like, say, when Fortuna came out, Fortuna was the latest and greatest thing. You stopped at Fortuna, and you were just, because that was the recent thing that you were doing, like, say, with the Archimedean area. You're just, when you go to late game stuff, you're just running Archimedean missions, or you're doing the bounties there. Well, the same thing applies to the other areas. So as you're going, you're naturally just going to collect everything as you do the missions and float through everything. And like right now, it's Elite Deep Archimedia, and like Netracells and stuff like that. Well, I'm maxed on Duplicate now, and I'm working on Crescendo, and to be honest, I might buy the last bit. But this is just going to be a continuing issue, because when players get to this late game stuff, what they find is the best example that I have in terms of where my genuine issue with it is that if you lower the defense of the enemy, it doesn't change the fact that there is going to come to a point where the player gets punished for not knowing how to mod. It just delays it and pushes it further back, which is, I think, going to be the biggest issue. Because I remember when the Zeraman, obviously it's a little bit ago now, but I remember this very distinctly. I remember when the Zeraman came out, obviously it was a bit buggy, but there was a point where I was doing the bounties, trying to get standing and everything, because it was the first time through. And there was somebody trying to kill a Void Angel with a moat amp. Because they didn't stop at the other places, they didn't know how to mod, and they beelined to endgame content. Where an older player doesn't have these issues, because they were there when Cetus came out. So they were just running Cetus stuff. Like we're running stuff on Deimos right now. When Deimos and the Necrolus came out, You just sat there at that area for an older player and just farmed everything. And once you were done with that, you went and did something else. That dynamic is just getting pushed further and further away. So now where somebody gets smacked theoretically at like level 80 or like the start of the star chart or Steel Path star chart, where it's like, hey, you're modding wrong, you have to figure this out. It's not preventing them from modding correctly, or it's not forcing them to learn. It's just pushing back when they get punished for it. And if you go by the info panel that they showed, it can potentially be dangerous because it also stops people from asking questions. This game, you gotta remember, is a millennial game. It's 10 years old. Zoomers didn't play this shit when it first came out. Like, there was no explanations whatsoever. Like, I'm an older player, but at no point in time do I want us going back to having, like skill trees and paying for revives, right? Like, I don't want that. But the fact is Warframe has its own damage scaling. It has its own way to gain damage. And they would rather fuck with the system to make it so people aren't punished for running whatever they want. Because like what they're going to talk about Blast. We'll move on to the thing because I'm going on a rant. You're going to have to learn how to mod in Warframe eventually because they're very, very clearly starting to run the level numbers up. It's going to make you learn how to do it, and it's better to pull the band-aid off in a quick motion, but inform players in-game of exactly what the dynamic is. Like, it could be, like, you can explain corrosive. They keep putting all of these hints in here, but I'm watching players that are brand new run whatever they had at the time. And at nowhere point in time does anything say, hey, you need to go farm all of these elements, and here's where to get it. Because, like, when you look in the codex, it shows, like, it doesn't show core mods that you need, or it doesn't give you core mods, except, like, Injunction, but it doesn't explain exactly what the benefit of those. It gives you a very small, like, not even detailed explanation where it's like, oh, corrosive reduces enemy armor. Okay, I get that. Like, I can see why that's a positive. But at no point in time does it say corrosive reduces armor by 80%. Then the weighting that you have on the weapon for corrosive, that also gains the benefit of a 75% armor bypass, so it only gets reduced by 25% of the armor. And then whatever that calculated value is, then receives a 75% bonus. The game doesn't tell you that. And a bunch of people, I know it's very trust me bro, but like, you can go under the wiki, it explains it there. When I was figuring this stuff out, I got numbers similar to it, but the wiki just shows the math in very clear terms, so just go there. Okay, but the game doesn't explain to you that, like, he's gonna. Well, let's watch this because I'll stop at the relevant points.
A long one. So let's start with what are we trying to solve? We're trying to solve several things. So this kind of long. I'm gonna start with armor. So armor scaling has been like a wall that you hit eventually as enemies level up. You get to the point where essentially, if you don't have armor stripping, the game becomes kind of like you cannot kill enemies. So we have an image.
Asset, yeah. Thank you. That's okay. A lot of assets. There it is.
So here's an example. This is actually relatively low level compared to like Deep Archimedia or what you can get on the circuit, but it's a level 200 heavy gunner. So you can see that it has 10,800 armor by default. Then you apply 10 stacks of corrosive on it, and it gets down to 2,163. And its damage reduction, that's how much of your damage gets kind of nerfed, went from 97% to 87%. So even though you took out 80% of its armor, its damage reduction only went down by 10%.
I understand where he's coming from on this. I get where he's coming from on this. But the fact is the conclusion the player comes to from this is thinking, oh, I'm receiving a massive, like he's doing puncture, slash, and corrosive. So whatever weapon he's doing, the fact is you have a ton of multipliers that attach onto this. And when you want to figure out what the math is for this, right? So let's do round numbers, right? We have 97.3 damage or armor with an effective damage reduction of 97.3. So pretty simple. For every 1, 2, 3, 10,000 damage minus 9730, you're going to do 270. If you don't deal, actually, what's the damage type? So if you have a weapon that deals ferrite, so if you have a weapon that, let's say, is pure magnetic, okay? You have a weapon that's pure magnetic, because that's possible. Your damage will get reduced to this, and it does exactly 10,000 damage. Okay. You will go all the way down to 270. And that's the absolute positive worst case scenario where the strength of their armor doesn't hurt you. So like, say, doing gas. Gas would knock you even lower, because it would reduce your damage by half and make it go through 50% more armor. So this armor value would go up to like 15k or whatever it is. Or like 16. So it would be even more, but this percentage has like an asymptote. It's like a 1/x relationship, if you remember that. For every percent increase in armor, it's an equal percent increase in EHP. And it's the combination of health and armor moving up together and getting stronger together that makes an enemy tanky. Now, Grenier's identity is its armor. The sentiment when he shows this is you think like, oh, it's 97% damage reduction. If you know how to mod, you're never fucking dealing with this number. And that is besides armor strip. Actually, this is a heavy gunner. Let's just go set this up. $200 a heavy gunner should be easy enough.
Where would the sanctuary be without you?
This frame has green shards. That is this one. Alright, no shards at all. And Grace Blessing. Okay, we got a Tank Oberon, really generic. Get rid of the exos. Heavy Gunner. Which one is it? Just the generic one? Alright, this guy. We'll do 200. And while we do this, let's look up Heavy Gunner Warframe. Alright, here's our tanky boy. We can get a quick calculation of the EHP that we're dealing with. All right, so the armor value that we're going to be dealing with is 10,815. That coincides with what Pablo was showing, right? 10,815. Okay, so we have the same armor value. The cloned flesh, this is how much damage you need to see on screen to kill this enemy. The damage reduction is 97.3. And my Phantasma is modded for corrosive and heat. Okay. So corrosive heat, we even got a heat ribbon. So this is the problem that they're talking about. Right? It doesn't seem like much of a problem to me. And that was, and his, actually, you know what, if he's seeing genuine armor values. So just for posterity, let's go ahead and swap over to this. He does not have the steel path modifier on. And let's get rid of the Panzer II, so no free viral. Alright, Panzer is gone. We're just a weapon frame. Right, so Heavy Gunner 200s, we now have the same enemy that he does. So I'm hitting for like, if you looked at the numbers, I'm hitting for like 10k. Okay, I'm hitting for like 10k on the raw damage, like the damage of hitting the enemy. This enemy only has 45,000 health. And this is the example that they're showing of what's a problem. So the first one was Steel Path, but with a Riven. The next one was no Riven. Every single one of you can build that build. I don't even have a faction mod on it. And it's just Corrosive Heat with a double heat setup. That's it. Every single one of you can build that, but it's a Steel Path enemy. Or it's a non-Steel Path regular star chart enemy with no bonuses. So the EHP, and this is one of the issues, is they're going to talk about EHP getting out of control. You never go through this. If the reason why you mod correctly is so you don't have to deal this damage. If you completely strip this enemy of all of its armor, this quote-unquote 10 million EHP goes down to double this amount. So it's 45,000, so it goes to 90k. And 90k is a much nicer amount of damage to do. So this is the problem that he's talking about. It's not an issue, even on Star Chart. Like the corrosive, running corrosive mods on a heat weapon and still modding for slash, or going for a massive corrosive. If you do one Tau Green Shard, it's like a 96% armor strip. And then you get the 75% armor reduction on the corrosive weighting. So if you go a monster corrosive weighting, you're destroying trash mobs. This is the issue that they're talking about, and it's not an issue. We've been given the tools to deal with this.
So because of this, it means that, you know, for a lot of you, armor strip is either like 100% armor strip or no armor strip. And you never want even 90% because that 10% left over, because of the way armor scales, it ends up not being good enough. So basically, we're going to change this a lot. And the first change is that now armor is going to have a cap. by default. Then you apply 10 stacks of corrosive on it, and it gets down to 2,163. And its damage reduction, that's how much of your damage gets kind of nerfed, went from 97% to 87%. So even though you took out 80% of its armor, its damage reduction only went down by 10%. So because of this, it means that, you know, for a lot of you, armor strip is either like 100%
They edited
armor
the
strip or
stream.
no armor strip. And you never want even 90% because that 10% left over, because of the way armor scales, it ends up not being good enough. So basically, we're going to change this a lot. And the first change is that now armor is going to have a cap. This is for enemies only, to be clear. This doesn't have anything, this is no effect on Tenno. But for enemies, now they will have a cap as a maximum armor that they can have. So right now we're experimenting with 2700, which essentially gives them 90% damage reduction. But again, like I said earlier, you know, this is very early, so those numbers might still change. So with the 2700, that means once you actually strip, even if it's just a 50% strip, now it's actually valuable because that damage reduction will change a lot. We are also changing the way that that equation of the damage reduction is calculated. Sorry, this is math, so you know, I'm sorry if you guys fell asleep for this part, but essentially right now what happens is that armor calculation is very bottom heavy. The first 50% DR you gain from 300 armor, and then the other 50% you gain from 300 up to infinity. So because of that is very, very bottom heavy, basically we're changing that calculation so it's a little more spread out. Again, that's just math. But basically what's going to happen, like the effect for you should be that you no longer feel that armor strip is mandated on high level. Obviously, it's still super good, because obviously if you take out 90% DR, you're basically making your damage 10x bigger. So it's really good still, but hopefully it doesn't feel mandated. And also partial.
This is another one of those things. It's true, but it's not really how it works out. You can get the armor value, like say for example, and we'll do a little bit of math here. So you're talking about this armor value here. This is the number that's too high. Watch how fast this shit disappears. Okay, so 10,850 damage or armor yields 97.3 damage reduction. Okay, so if we have corrosive minus 80%, okay, and then we have heat, we're at 1,000. And if we have a either pure corrosive weapon or a weapon that has a very heavy corrosive weighting on it, so say you've done like a prime toxin mod and like a 90 electric mod, like you've got your weapon is mostly corrosive. That corrosive portion will then bypass 75%. And 217 armor is less than 40% DR. And that's from this. So let's go back to this and we'll try to find something. Actually, we can probably just drum it up real quick. Damage. Let's do 270. Okay, so 47%, 47.3 damage reduction. So how we're going to divide this out, and I'm going to need, so I don't have a brain fart. So we have 10,815 is 97.3 damage reduction. And then our new armor value. Please stop trying to jump. There we go. Just 270. Let's do 0.4. Actually, let's just do that. So the armor calculator, this is our new damage reduction. Okay, so if we shoot something, and we came to this conclusion before, with 10,000 damage, it gets reduced down to, where did I put that before? $270. That's kind of convenient. So the new one is going to be 10,000 minus 47.375. 47.37%. So this is our new damage value. So our damage is going to get increased from 270 to 52,630. And this is rough bro math. This isn't going to be exact. I'm obviously not doing quantization or anything. So just from modding for heavy corrosive, our damage is going to go up by 19.5 times. Okay, just a straight up multiplier. So like, however you want to think about that mentally, if you prefer percents, convert it to a percent plus 1850% just from modding correctly. And the big thing is, and here's where the EHP disappears. What did he have? 200. Is 45,000 damage is like a couple of bullets. Where did my calculator go? I got rid of it. So 45 divided by 9, 5. Sorry, 45 divided by 5263. Nope. $45,000 divided by 5,263. That's 9 bullets. Is anybody gonna say that enemy is tanky? And you haven't even, and that's a multiplier. And that's saying we're doing 10,000 damage. If you add everything up, and you add Merciless in, you add Crit, and then it gets reduced even further by the Corrosive weakness bonus. This isn't an issue. The issue is that you're not explaining the damage. That enemy isn't tanky. And that's part of the issue. So this example, the main problem that everybody is having right now, in terms of the dynamic that's occurred, is all of the people that understand this are complaining that the enemies are going to get nerfed. And it's because it's true. But the truth is that the enemies for most of the star chart and Steel Path are going to be ultra easy to kill. They're already tissue paper. I am not running armor strip besides green shards on any of my fucking frames right now. And I'm full stripping now, passively. This isn't the issue. It's the fact that the Grenier's identity is kind of gone. But in terms of the older players getting pissed, is everybody didn't understand this dynamic. Anybody who didn't understand how EHP scales linearly is asking somebody that does understand that. And the older players, because as we watch the rest of this, he doesn't commit to this. So they're like, well, why is it going to be worse? Like, the enemies are going to be easier, which is true. But the joke is that upper levels, at like level cap, the enemies are going to be tankier. Which is a good thing. I like that. But the problem is because of my my deal with the clan and alliance is I'm going to have people that are going to they're trying to allow people to rush further into the content of Warframe and not get punished for not learning the game, where everybody else had to do that. It's like getting to Whispers in the Wall and saying you don't have to do the new war, or you don't have to do the second dream or something like that. And then they get to the end and they're like, why is everything like this? It's like, oh, well, didn't you take this step? No, they rushed through it. Like, Warframe forces you to play through everything. It's not like World of Warcraft where you can level boost somebody to the current content continent. Because what ends up happening is somebody gets as absolute far as they can, and then they can't progress any further, and then they end up on the wiki having to search for everything. And they have to search mod at a time so they can complete a build, because they didn't learn the stuff that they needed to learn. Now, it's a problem for DE, I get it, but allowing them to progress further without getting punished, that means your content is easier also. The only way you get diversity in builds is when they all compete together. You have to bring the other stuff up. And even then, the reason why armor strip is so prevalent is because the enemies that they're trying to present us with, a lot of them have armor. If the late game enemy was the infested, nobody would be fucking talking about armor strip. Okay? Like, if the late game enemy was Corpus, nobody would be talking about armor strip. Against the Murmur, you kinda need armor strip, but what you really need is to be able to burn down HP values in Overguard. That's what you actually need against them, with a little bit of armor strip. Like, you need a little bit of corrosive, but like the guaranteed armor strip builds, where it's like baked into everything, aren't that big of a deal. It's just not that big of a deal, especially when you have the shards. Like, if you're going to do a level cap, throw a couple of green shards on and run like a compressor or something like that, and you're good to go. You get all 14 statuses or whatever it is, and they're completely armor stripped. It's not an issue. We already have the tools. This is fixing a problem that already has a solution, but they don't want to put like a modding 101 in here, or like a modding 102, 103. They don't want to put the information into the game. Like, I get the sentiment that, like, oh, it's going to prevent people from going to the wiki, and I can get that. I absolutely get that sentiment, on the principle that the information should already be in the game.
Now should be more viable. Those are the main two things that we're trying to address with this armor change. Now, obviously, you're probably wondering, well, once you do this, won't enemies just fall apart like a soft tissue? Probably. So we are actually tweaking a little bit the health scaling after. So since armor is no longer going to scale past a certain point, we're looking at maybe scaling the health past that point. Not to make it equal, because making it equal would be a crazy number, but just a little bit so they are not totally destroyed. Part of that, actually, let's not go to this
Not
yet.
this yet. Oh, sorry. Just the quality of life, or the slide.
And to go back to what he just said, this is the thing that the older players are freaking out about, is that all of their builds are already tuned. That the people that understand how to mod have already tuned their builds to deal with the current enemies. And they're paper now. So they've just said, he just said, and this is part of the issue, is they don't explain it well, is if they had said, oh, we're going to adjust the armor values down, but we're going to increase the health values so it's exactly the same EHP, nobody would be saying anything. You'd have some complainers, but like the vast majority of people would be like, okay, neat, because they know it means the enemies are going to be tankier, because everybody builds armor shred into their builds anyway. Even if you just use heat, That's 50% armor shred. I put heat and corrosive on my damage dealing weapons. I even do it in like EDA and stuff like that. Just for ease of use. It's not even optimal damage. We're already blowing shit up. So them not increasing the health values means people with bad builds are going to get to a later stage in the game and then get hit with something like, say, overguard enemies, and they're not going to do shit for damage against them. Or actually, the worst thing is at lower levels, an enemy, say you're running blast against the Grenier, is you're going to hit an enemy with overguard and your damage is going to go up, and then you're going to hit some weak ass enemy and you're not going to do anything to it, right? Like, it's just pushing off the inevitable, because eventually they're going to get to a point like an hour into some mission, like, and this is part of the thing that people are actually having an issue with, is if they are tuning the enemies to make EDA casual friendly, it's going to nerf all the enemies, ultimately. Though at level cap, it is going to make them tankier, because we're armor stripping anyway. But they're already tissue paper. So that's part of the issue.
Yeah, there you go.
So once we adjust that, we also want to tweak the corpus and the infested a little bit. So we're probably going to buff the health of the infested a little bit. And for the corpus, once they're past level 70, now they're going to start scaling their shield recharge. The idea being that right now, the shields almost feel like health most of the time because you never see them recharging. So basically from now past level 70, if you shoot them and then you stop shooting them, you should see the shield coming back up, so that it feels more like actual shields.
Got to break those shields. Yeah.
So hopefully it becomes more of an actual mechanic that you care about. Because right now, basically the same build that you use for the Grenier, you end up using for the Corpus and the Infested because they're so much squishier than the Grenier that it kind of almost doesn't matter. So
this is one of those sentiments I don't agree with. And talking about Tyler Prime's comment, it's either a pure, against the Grenier, you either go pure viral on an armor strip build, or you do viral slash, or at level cap, if you want to do slash, you go pure slash, and then dump as much status and vulnerability that you can onto the enemy. Against the Corpus, you do a little bit of armor shred, but you always go toxin, unless the enemy has proto shields. If you're in an area with enemies with proto shields, that's the only time you use magnetic, really, is against proto shield enemies. But other than that, against the Corpus, it's pure toxin, and you just remember to armor strip the occasional enemy that has armor. It's not a big change. So this idea of using the same build, you can use an identical build against anything, because regardless of what your damage type is, you could use gas electric on everything, and with enough bullets you will kill it. But it's knowing how to mod against those enemies that you have to learn. It's how damage is dealt in the game. Like, I guess World of Warcraft, like, tanks, healers, damage. Like, you have to understand that. You don't try to get rid of that system. You make it easier to learn, right? This is the system that Warframe has, and it's had for a long time. They're messing with literally how you interact with the game. And I honestly wish they had a little bit more concrete thing, or a better idea, because that is like 90% of the issue here, is the idea that they put out. If they had put out something where it's like, hey, we're looking to take a real hard look at this, we have a forum thread, we have a survey to fill out, or add us on Twitter or something, so we can get an idea, or like maybe spitball or something like that. We're looking for community input on this. It would have been completely different. But to say, oh, like what you just said, we're going to increase the HP values a little bit, not to where they would be ridiculous. Okay, it's still going to make them die, and it's going to make Overguard way tankier also. So, like, shit like the Murmur, for example, or Overguard on Infested, they're going to get really tanky. But then you just change your build. We already have the tools for it.
Because of that, we're hoping basically to make the crazy high level Green Era and Corrupted not as hard, and then lift up the two factions that are way squishier at the moment.
Yes. So that's part one of the
Part one of
conversation.
3.
Yeah, so part 1 of 3, and like what we hope you feel is that the all or nothing armor conversations and builds turns into a much more normalized conversation about build strategy, quote unquote. Partial armor strip is valuable. The end.
Yeah.
Armor scaling is capped. The end.
That'd be the plan. Now, skin types. Now is the other image.
Yes.
So
Thanks,
this
Wiki.
beautiful graphic, which actually I messed up when I took it, and I have alloy armor twice. Sorry.
Yes.
So we have 13 types of skin types, which I'm sure you all know by heart.
I do.
And we
I know these, and let me tell you, most of these are fucking irrelevant. Like, you're never going to interact with a large portion of these.
have 13 types of damage. So that generates this beautiful matrix that you see here with all the different types. Now, for the most part, our experience is that a lot of players just don't engage with this because it's so complicated that, what is the difference between shields and proto shields? Most people never know because
I like how they pulled this from the wiki instead of like a DE official source.
the only way to know is to go to the codex, memorize which unit has what, and it just doesn't work out really. And some of the numbers are also like kind of all over the place, like a plus 15%. You're probably not going to notice, but then some are plus 75. It also causes some weird issues. For example, sometimes with a mid-level Lancer, if you strip the armor, you end up doing less damage because you probably were shooting with corrosive. So since corrosive gives you a bonus while they had armor, now because you strip the armor, you do less damage, right? So it creates a lot of weird things there that don't really add too much. So what we're doing is we do think that it's valuable to have a system like this. We just think it's so complicated that no one engages with it. So instead of making it each damage type has a multiplier for all of those skin types, now it's going to be per faction. So essentially, you'll have, for example, the Greeneer are now going to be vulnerable to, and this again is all changing, but something like corrosive and slash. Let's just say those two. So now Greeneer, everywhere in the game, they're always vulnerable to those two. Then, similar to that, the Corpus will have their own, which will be probably like magnetic and puncture, let's just say. Again, we're still changing all this.
Example purposes only.
For example purposes. So you'll end up only with the factions themselves having a damage type, which will help because now you can go into the star chart. I don't know if we have that.
Oh,
as
we
well.
do,
we do.
Pablo. Of course, I got you.
So instead of having to learn this in the codex and memorize it and all that, now when you go to the star chart and you hover over a node,
Okay, this is the thing that I think is overall a really good idea. Where it shows suggested damage, puncture magnetic. Obviously, this is like a visual representation of what they're talking about. It's not like final product. What I'd like to see, and if I can back up without skipping too far, as much as I'm going to go in terms of like personal opinion on what they should have done, I would say just scrap all of these plus 15s. Either get rid of them or make them 25. Just make everything on here 25, 50, 75. The 15, nobody builds around that I know of. And like puncture, like get rid of the 15s and turn them into 25s. Like everything in the IPS, just make like every faction is strong versus something, neutral versus something, weak against something. So just along the thing, everybody knows it's plus 25, 0, or minus 25 going all the way down here. Like the minus 50s and stuff like that, just turn those into 25s, go all the... So it's a very simple rock, paper, scissors. Because like a plus 25 on radiation to robotic, you don't need to know that information. You're not going to build around it. Because the issue is most of these things are redundant. So like the alloy armor that you see listed twice, they shouldn't have listed this twice. It's ferrite armor, alloy armor, and wherever the one was, it machinery. Actually, we can just go look at it. Nah, the one for the Tusk Thumpers. So when you go against the Grineer in mission, you need to know ferrite armor, alloy armor, clone flesh. That's it. When you go against the Murmur, it's in different facade and alloy armor and machine for the mechs. Machinery is special equipment. Robotic is uncommon also. Haven't seen object before. Shields are like 99% of the corpus. Proto shield, the only real difference is that it prevents the toxin bypass. So this is a special enemy also, so you really don't need to build around this either. It's shields, and they have health, or they have shields, armor, and health. That's it. And those enemies are pretty rare also. Like say for example, I think the directors from the Fortuna missions have shields, health, and armor. And some index enemies have shields, armor, and health. But other than that, most of the corpus that you're going against is a shield bar and a health bar. Against the infested, it's mostly health. There's also infested sinew. So infested flesh, and infested sinew. There you go. And there's like some really weak enemies that have armor. What is it? The Charger and the Juggernaut, and the Deimos ones, obviously. There's a bunch that have armor there. So it's just basically remembering two things against each enemy and how to deal with it. You need to know what the raw damage increase is, so like what he showed, impact, magnetic, and to know which dot hurts them the most. So IPS is somewhat relevant, but you're never going to build around it. I use slash weapons against the corpus, but I mod them for toxin and a heavy weight of toxin. Like impact is a big, can be a big increase damage wise on raw damage builds. So you would go like on an impact only weapon and throw like a big magnetic on it. You can do that. I've done that. Like hammers are pretty good for that. Like what is it, like the heliocores? Those do pretty well against the corpus because they have that massive impact weighting on them. The Archititron does great. A lot of, what is it? I'm drawing a blank. What's the Tenet weapon? Tenet Agendus is what? Impact electricity. Turn it into magnetic. Throw a cold mod on there, dude. You just have to remember what they're weak against. It's an IPS, so it's impact, puncture, slash for the first one. You just have to remember what their green number is. You have to remember what element they're plus 75 weak to, and then you have to remember the dot. That's it for a generic build against them. But you have to go and learn about this stuff, right? It's very basic, and if they add that to the info panel, I can literally see zero issues with it.
Of course, I got you.
So instead of having to learn this in the code,
So like suggested damage, raw damage, and then down here do like a dot, like weak to dot or something, like, or this dot, you know. So it's like impact is like plus, like there's the plus, the 2 plus, and the 3 plus to show 25, 50, 75. There's no thing for 15, right? So it's 1, 2, or 3 pluses, and then you show the dot also. So that's the only real thing I can say, like opinion wise, is I'd like to see the dot also. Because even now, I'm generally for like general builds where it's like not a level cap build, I'll run the combo element, the tier 2, with the dot if I'm going against them for just like general damage, and I'll make sure my weighting is for whatever the dot is. But like against the corpus, like what I was saying, this isn't how you mod against these enemies. You mod with toxin damage if you want to maximize your damage. And if you want to do magnetic, you can take like a Tenet Agendus. Yeah, take like a Tenet Agendis or something, and get like Toxin onto it. Obviously, that's going to require a Riven, but you can do it, right?
Codex and memorize it and all that. Now, when you go to a star chart and you hover over a node, it'll suggest you which ones they're strong to. Again, those multipliers will be 50%, so they're good, but they're also not mandated. You can totally go without those. If your weapon does a lot of viral and you want to just stick to your viral slash, you'll be totally fine. But if you want to go with the suggested damage, you can go to this, and hopefully this will mean that now there's a little bit, at the very least, it'll be more surfaced, and you'll have like the ability to kind of understand, like, okay, this is what goes with this, to kind of get those combinations. So the factions, beyond the ones you know, we're also going to have 3 new ones, which are like sub-factions that we think are important for the original factions, and that is Kuba Grenier will be special, the Amalgam
yep.
Corpus, and the Deimos Infested. So those are the 3 kind of new ones that we're treating like this, and this is kind of the vibe that you should expect. So the very base factions will be the Corpus Grenier Infested. Those only have 2 vulnerabilities. Every other one has 2 vulnerabilities and 1 resistance. So that's kind of how we're going to do it. So once you're more advanced into the game and you start finding those more advanced factions, you'll also have to account for their resistance.
That's part 2.
That's part
but
2.
there's part 3.
There's part
Let's
3.
talk about that Glaxion choice. Why would we choose the
Glaxion
cold
choice.
weapon? Don't you think that there's some statuses that the player gets to use in game that are just overshadowed? Wouldn't it be cool if we buffed blast, cold?
All right, I'm not going to mess with that. Buffing cold and blast, just to talk about it, I guess. Anything that deals cold, obviously getting a buff. Frost is living his best life, Jesus Christ. Don't forget secondary shiver exists. Enemies take plus 45% damage per cold status. This is probably going to be a real strong contender. I wouldn't be surprised if there's builds going around once we see what the final thing is, what they say the status, the new cold status cap is. This be getting more use. It's multiplicative to galvanized shot, but it scales additively with galvanized shot, I think. Actually, I'm not sure about that. It scales multiplicatively, I think, along galvanized shot. So whatever galvanized shot is what shiver is. But because it's limited to the number of cold stacks, obviously the CC that you get from cold, getting that temporary freeze is going to be super dank. What is that? It's a rifle. Crap, what's that weapon? Here we go. A Shivering Contagion. Remember, this exists also. Enemies affected by cold status have a scaling % chance to spread that status to other enemies within 6 meters. This is obviously unranked. The other one, when you rank it up, is obviously going to be better. So those are going to start to perform significantly better if they don't nerf them, which is another thing they didn't mention. At max stacks, apparently you get more crit damage. It doubles the crit damage bonus that you get because they mentioned it in the dev workshop, which wasn't super helpful. It elucidated a bunch of stuff, but the questions that they had, they did have what they thought blast was going to be in here. If you want to look that up, I'm not going to repeat it because they removed it. But blast is basically going to have a secondary explosion. I'm looking forward to it, honestly. Get blast to do something, for the love of God. But the issue that's going to come about is that, like, where you were concerned about the 6-7 health types, is it's going to cost Forma. Because instead of having a general build, if they start messing with enemy health types, like say the Kuva Guardians, because we don't know, this is part of the issue, is we don't know. If they decide to make Kuva Grenier weak to radiation, well, you're nerfed, right? Like, we don't know what they're going to do. Like, if they make the Grenier, the Kuva Grenier weak to radiation, but the regular Grenier weak to corrosive, well, you still got to run viral slash. You know what I'm saying? The enemies that were weak to corrosive were generally the trash mobs. The radiation ones were the tankier ones, like your Nox and some of the elite ones, like bombards and stuff like that, right? So any of those rare things, you would run corrosive to deal with like 90% of the enemies, and then you would maybe prime, even though you didn't need to, maybe prime the tankier enemies, the elite units, but you would still be getting the bonus of the armor strip, even though you wouldn't be getting the weakness increase. And you would still mod corrosive, even though you're not getting the triple dip on it. You would still get the armor reduction, so that would increase your armor. But then you go slash also, right? So you'd go like corrosive heat slash and try to like riven into it, or use a weapon that's appropriate. So that sort of stuff. You would just use the weapons, use the tools that you have. That's part of the thing, is that these issues have been figured out already. And that's part of the issue, that what people are having with it is that these problems, like, oh, now we're going to need weapons against each faction. They didn't specify. We don't know. They're probably not going to change that much. But, like, if you notice, like, we don't know what the new types are. They're going to shrink it down. But this is pretty easy once you realize that you can take a bunch of these out. This isn't that big of a deal. Like, ferrite armor is ferrite armor regardless of where it is, right? Like, ferrite armor here, ferrite armor. It's all corrosive. Machinery is pretty irrelevant. Against Grenier, you need to know cloned flesh. And corrosive to reduce armor on both. Heat reduces it another 50%. And with like 100 munitions build, the enemy's going to be dead. Flesh for Corpus. So toxin. Ideally, you want a toxin-weighted weapon with viral priming and an armor strip. And Corpus Explode. Infested. Do gas electric. With obviously armor to deal with the random enemy if you're doing a long mission. Viral priming with the gas electric. Sentient. Flesh, again, like Corpus. They're ferrite, alloy. Shields are going to shield. It's the same as the Corpus. It's the same thing. Corrosive. And maybe a paracesis if you want to do, some faction damage to them. Murmur is kind of wonky. That's sort of its own thing. The weaknesses are all messed up, but viral, corrosive, electricity, there's an enemy that each element does really well against. Like, there's an enemy that's weak to gas. There's an enemy that's weak to electricity, radiation. Most of them are weak to radiation. But that sort of thing. You still have to learn. And the fact that this chart isn't easily accessible in game, like it's not a pop-up, doesn't help. And that's one of the things that people are pretty pissed about, is that they're clearly kidifying the game. They're making it cell phone friendly. Just to put on my tinfoil hat, the fact is they're trying to make it cell phone friendly. But the game has to mean something. If you make it so nobody has to learn anything getting into the game, then the game is of zero value. Like people have to learn how to play solitaire. People have to learn how to play Monopoly. Like, there's rules. You don't have to learn all of them, but you do have to learn some of them. And if you have people that jump in and just want to run to the end stuff, like, help them learn. Don't adapt to make it easier to somebody that doesn't have to learn anything. And that's the serious issue that people are having with it, is instead of explaining this stuff and being like, here's the damage types, because unless you look in the codex and search up the enemies, or you go into the simulacrum and mess around with this stuff, you're not going to learn any of this stuff. You have to go to the wiki, or watch a YouTuber or something. There are a bunch of YouTubers that explain the damage types, even the ones that did like 2.0 builds, or like Melee 2.0 and like Status 2.0 and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff is still super relevant, right? So this is the issue. I explained a little more than you obviously asked, but that's the issue with it. So telling new players what elements are good against that faction a bad thing. It's got to be the right thing though. Like, how many people honestly build magnetic impact? Like, they're gonna put the magnetic mods on there. They're gonna put cold electricity on there and impact mod, and they're not gonna do shit for damage because the person doing toxin is gonna blow right past them. They're not gonna get to participate. It's not how you mod. If they're gonna recommend something, they need to recommend the right thing, and they should have asked. Like, I haven't heard of anybody getting asked. I know they're not gonna ask me, but like, the people that I've talked to that are in the space of like really teaching people and making YouTube videos and like Warframe content creators that I've asked, none of them have been asked on how to make this problem easier. DE's doing this on their own, and it's just, I'm tired of being a beta tester because like I need to know if I need to remake all of my videos, and that's just kind of where it is. Like, I need to know if I need to remake all of my videos. Because if they really go ham with what they just talked about, like I'll remake some of them. But like the build videos, like if they reduce the damage or the damage reduction and they cap it at 90%, that changes the dynamic more than people realize. Like, I just showed you how much armor you can burn past. And you deal millions of damage to begin with. Right? Like, okay, let's do... We'll do our old Tonkor buddy here. And this will be the last thing. Modded for corrosive. And we'll do... Strip. So heavy gunner, right? $4K, $11K, got a $17K, $12K, right? So we're gonna change one mod. We have Toxin on here innately. We'll swap over to Viral. Everything else is the same. 800 damage, it didn't change. $61K. Let me get some more enemies. $208K. 71K. I need them to not die so fast. $211K. 148K. Okay, so we have a good orange crit amount. I am not typing into my text box. What was it? Heavy gunner Herod? Oh, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we did non-steel path. And we were doing what? 170K? Let's say 150K. So if I increase this up to 500, the health is 71K. Let's just add a 0. That's 270. Okay, at 170K, At 170k, I know I did a couple that were over 200. Maybe that was like a headshot or something. At 170k, the damage amount that I need to see on screen to one-shot this guy is 176,000 at level 3,000. If we go up to level cap, I need to see less than double the amount. At level cap, in order to one-shot this guy, this EHP value doesn't matter a whole lot down here. I know it says a bajillion EHP, but that's if you're literally building not right. The damage value I need to see on screen to one-shot this guy is a little over 322,000. And if I armor strip, this is the value I gotta see. So you do enough damage. You do enough damage to one-shot everything already. And that's the reason why. Because they also mentioned armor value minimums, which are going to hurt newer players. Though obviously most people aren't new player for a long time. But the big issue with this, honestly, is the fact that they just didn't explain it well enough. And that's the truth. They just didn't explain the damn thing well enough. So this is the issue that people are having with it. I know. Alright, I'm going to end it. Tyler Prime, I hope this was helpful. I explained the entire thing. I clarified my position. I'm not really saying, like, oh, this is shit. But what I am saying is that they are messing with stuff that is absolutely core to how every single person in this game interacts with the game. And you cannot treat us like beta testers on this. You can fuck this game up messing with those numbers. Okay? This isn't like a frame release like Dante. You can fuck the game up fucking that up. Okay? There's no hotfix patch unless it's a revert. Because the fact is that once they release that, it's probably going to cost me 1,000 forma to redo my weapons to be able to deal with that stuff. And if that's what they want, I'm going to have to make that decision on whether or not I want to do that. I am a consumer. I am not part of the team. Do I want to play a game that messes with stuff that absolutely changes how I experience the game, instead of just coming out with stuff that's tougher? Or adjusting the scaling so things are stronger, like the EDA. Like, I would have loved if they had just come out with a higher density of enemies. Everybody remembers when Netracells came out, where you could go in on Steel Path. Dude, I was running that shit for fun. That enemy density on solo, where my computer could spawn in the enemies that it could handle, that shit was crazy. 350, 400 kills per minute. Dude, it was so good. But that's because I'm not connected to a network when I'm doing that, and I'm not burdened by somebody on a Switch or on a cell phone, right? That's why the spawns are dead. And you look at your screen and you're on a PC and you're playing a game and you see a bunch of those little cross whatevers, whatever that icon is, because it doesn't show you what the hell they're on. A Switch host, you're going to go into a mission and there's going to be like 30 enemies. Right? So that's the issue. Like, Warframe, not to go into like the normal way it is, but like the fact is Warframe is pay to win in some aspects. It's not pay to win really, besides Riven's in game and buying mods, but like literally having a better system, a better computer, means more enemies spawn and they move faster. Like, it's been tested. Enemies on higher FPS systems literally get to you faster, which is a direct correlation to how much you can farm. Okay? So, it's frustrating, but this is how I see it. In terms of what your question is, I talked about a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm not really sure whether it was to help elucidate the issue or for my sake to just be able to get it off my chest. But I hope this helps. Anyway, later, dude. To anybody else that made it this far, God bless you. Have a blessed day.